another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me as always is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm very well, Jody. How are you doing?
I'm all right as well.
Yay. Well, let's get going here because we got a few things to go through. We talked about this, but we wanted to do an episode on 5 tips of things that I would have liked to have been told when I started out and things to focus on. I would just hopefully make it a little bit easier on myself and hopefully after this episode on somebody else.
Yay.
What we'll do is we'll just jump right into our list here. What do you think, Jody?
Sounds like a good idea. What's the first thing that you wish you would have been told?
Well, this is actually also not just what I would have been told, but certainly what I see everywhere. And it's don't get too focused on the gear.
Oh, come on. People all over social media that call themselves producers, i.e. mixing and mastering engineers, get thoroughly focused on this stuff.
Yes, because one, it's fun, but as you know, famous mix engineers have said, it's not the gear, it's the ear.
Look at that. They just removed the G and all of a sudden there's profound wisdom.
Right. Yeah, but it is so true because if we look back at like the history of recording, nobody has ever said, okay, well, we're going to put off making this record until we can buy a new 1176.
Could you imagine
or
if they'd
whatever,
waited on
like,
that?
Right. Yeah. Stuff wouldn't get done. Right.
Yep.
So, you know, you do the best with what you got. I think that mindset is possibly a little bit lost today. Well, I can't do this until I get this or until I get my new interface or whatever happens to be. It's going to be so much better, and we'd never end up doing anything.
Well, I think the reason behind that is there is such a plethora of digital computer-oriented recording gear, so to speak, software out there that gives you essentially gear overload.
Sure. That's how capitalism works, right? You offer somebody a solution to their problem, perceived or not. So
Sure.
I'm as susceptible to it as you are and everybody else. It's like, how many freaking 1176s or LA2As do you actually need to do this mix, right?
You mean different iterations of an 1176?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's goes on where people go, well, which one is the closest? Is it the UA one? Is it the Slate one? Is it the insert your favorite manufacturer here, right? It's such a moot point, I think.
It can be.
Yeah. Not that there aren't differences in there, but are they big enough to sweat over?
No.
So the focus on the gear is unnecessary. Do we want to have good gear? Yeah, of course we do, but you do the best with what you got.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a different thing if, let's say, you want to start recording something and you don't have a microphone. Well, you need a microphone, right?
If
But
you're
you don't
using a
need-
physical object to record, yes. If you're using a
Right.
virtual instrument, not so much.
Well, let's say for when I started off, you know, as a guitar player, I had my sequencer that I did all the sequencing in, and it was going into Tascam 488, and I wanted to add guitar to that. There was no way to record that. I know I'm dating myself here, but there was no such thing as digital audio at the point.
Right.
At that point, so yeah, you need a microphone.
Yep.
Right, so I'm saying that, or if you're a singer, whatever, yeah, you need a microphone. Don't worry about getting the absolute, air quote here, best one.
And therein is another question that pops up a lot. What's the best vocal mic for me to get?
Yeah.
Well, as someone who does vocal engineering, so to speak, I don't know until I hear your voice
Yeah.
in front of said microphone or a bunch of said microphones to know which one complements your voice best on the song at hand.
Right.
Because it can change.
It certainly can. Male singer, female singer, changes possibly which mic that you might want to use.
Sure.
On that as well, on that note, is like if you have a good sounding microphone, the performance is way more important than the mic. How the singer performs carries over. It's like, oh, you know what? We should have used the 414 here instead of whatever, right? It would have been better. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's like the singer's performance is the best one for that, the choice of mic, right? Do you ever run into that, though, when people are reluctant to use whatever mic that you might be offering?
Not yet, I haven't, no.
Oh, that's good.
I've been lucky in that regard.
Right. Excellent. Because I think that there are certain people that would be like, no, I need to have this.
Yeah. But if they know their voice and they know that's what it requires, that's a different story.
Yes. Yes. That's absolutely a very good point. Because if they have, no, this is my flux capacitor mic, right? Whatever happens to be that makes them comfortable when they're performing, then by all means use that mic, right? Even if it's not ideal, because again, you're going to get that performance out of it. It's the focus on the gear that I think can get in our way of actually trying to accomplish stuff. You do the best with what you got, not just me, but you as well. All the gear that we're fortunate enough to sit on today has been a progression over a very long time.
Yes.
To steal another expression, you might want to have more crayons in the crayon box when you know the differences of the piece of gear.
Right.
Too much focus on the gear, I think.
Some people see it as a need to accumulate as many plugins as possible. Ironically enough, we just recently saw a post about needing to downsize gigantic plugin libraries from like over 3,000 plugins because it becomes a real pain in the ass to search through those plugins when you only use maybe 10 or 12.
Right.
If you're only using 10 or 12 on the average, why do you need 3,000 plus?
Yes, that's true. And it is, a lot of people engage in that sort of like the arms race of plugin lists, right? My plugin list is longer than yours. The only case where I can see where people have an actual need for that are established mix engineers that receive Pro Tools sessions from the producer.
Sure.
And they want to be able to open that up. If you're in that situation,
fantastic.
You're probably that's great, but then you're probably also not listening to this podcast. So it's, you make do with what you have and you don't need everything.
Oh, and another reason why most people get caught up in it is because it is fun to get something new and shiny, and it could be inspirational.
Yes.
But it is not the be-all, end-all for actually getting something done.
Yeah, this is very true. I mean, I have a fetish that I try to keep under control with different soft synths, right? I like soft synths. I have place in my heart for them. I don't know why, because I'm not a great keyboard player, but I do. It's make and do whatever you have. If I bought another shiny new emulation of an old synth, it would not have an effect on what I do at all, more than likely. And I realize that now. You're not going to hear the differences. So make do with what you have. But it can be inspirational, and that happens to people. Composers, they need something to just trigger something. It shouldn't be a substitute for just kind of like doing it, going in and actually making music or mixing, whatever happens to be.
Word. What's next on our list here?
Kind of related to what we just talked about, it's to really get to know the gear that you have.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That was episode 1.
It was, yeah. But therein lies, let's say that this sort of half joke I just said about soft synths is I think so many people collect software for the preset list and don't necessarily know how to dial in the sound that they hear in their head on a keyboard, or if it's amp sims or whatever it happens to be. When people had limited amounts of gear, specifically in sort of like the analog days, you really had to make that stuff work.
Yes, you did. I would posit you still need to make that stuff work. And in a recent social media type thing, a guy was expressing an attitude of saying, hey, I think every guitar player should experience the concept of playing through a 100-watt stack. And I responded by saying, I don't think the stack matters, but the volume does. Because his whole thing was the 100-watt stack will shake your core and make you feel like you're really playing something. Reality is, yeah, a tube stack can do that. Solid state stack could do that. A refrigerator rack could do that, and digital amps can do that. There really isn't a difference when you've got the volume cranked that loud that it shakes your core. That's not the thing. And they got so focused on it has to be a tube amp that shakes your core. And I'm thinking, no, not at the volume level that you're thinking of. It really doesn't matter.
I would agree with that. I do think, though, that if we take sort of a step back from that mindset, even if you're a big amp sim aficionado as I am, because the ease of use and the sound of them are just fantastic today, it's not a bad idea to practice miking up a guitar cab.
No, not at all.
It is
you need to understand that, especially if you're a recording engineer or a mixing engineer, you need to understand that. My point to that social media post when I posted it was you need to let the guitar player be comfortable with whatever gear they're using. Some guys are now comfortable with digital amps. C'est la vie. Who cares? The volume level that you're talking about that you use to shake your core, it doesn't matter what amp you're using. Any amp can do that when you turn it up loud enough. And they were like, oh, digital amps are like if you're riding a horse compared to playing Red Dead Redemption and virtually riding a horse. Well, no, that you still have to plug in a guitar into a digital amp regardless to play it. It's not the same thing as a virtual horse compared to a real horse, which is really crazy to me.
That was a weird,
bizarre kind of thing. Regardless, get to know the gear that you have. And that's essentially our entire first episode. So if you really want to get down in the weeds for that, go back to that first episode we did a few years back.
Yeah. And we discover so much about not just the gear, but sound itself, like what we can actually accomplish with the gear that we have. One thing that we have talked about in the past with quality of gear, you also end up learning limitations about the gear that you have then, right? Where it's like, oh, when I try to do this, it simply can't do it. Then it becomes a more valid reason to sort of upgrade to something else, whatever that is.
Or
right?
invent that thing that can't do, that nobody's invented yet. If you need to invent it.
Could be that as well. But yeah. So those are sort of like very like gear-centric questions. The next one is more of a mindset, I would think. And this is to do some housekeeping before you start mixing.
And what do you mean by housekeeping?
To me, housekeeping is kind of like taking care of making things in tune, in time, in those things, taking care of little clicks and pops in your session file before you start mixing. This is something that took me a while to realize that I needed to do. What ended up happening was a lot of times where I hadn't done this, these negative artifacts or whatever you'd like to call them will rear their ugly head once you start mixing.
They can,
and
for sure.
Yeah, so you put some compression on the lead vocal, for example, and now you start hearing everything that's going on in between vocal lines or whatever. And that can really, really bother you after a while. I know you had a recent case because you've been doing like some Dolby Atmos stuff where this really became apparent to you.
It did on a lead vocal that even this morning before we started recording this episode, in listening to the vocal, which sounds great in a stereo mix, in Dolby Atmos, there were elements that were happening in the mix that when I soloed it out, it was like, oh my. So I'm doing real quick mutes, which is adding extra time to doing the mix and getting it finalized because I'm muting out certain noises that should have been gone from the beginning. And it wasn't because I was lazy. It's just because the volume level that was being edited on originally before it was transferred to multi-tracks for a mix, you don't notice it. And you definitely don't notice it in stereo, but you notice it in Dolby Atmos. And it's like, okay, now I've got to automate portions of the mix to remove certain noises like that.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's like the negative thing of that, you might think, well, what's the big deal? You stop your mix and you do a couple of edits or whatever. But you and I have always been proponents of trying to mix as fast as possible, not get down into the weeds. And when you have to sort of switch that mindset from going from a more of a creative mindset as you're mixing to just going back in and fixing problems, nothing kills the flow worse than that.
True.
It's one of those things that where you save a little time up front by just going through these things, and the results will come faster, and I would say arguably better as well, because you don't have to worry about these things in your mix. So that is a big one. We could spend a whole hour talking about what we do before we mix, I think. So,
but we have done that. So send people to those kind of episodes that we've done in the past as well.
Sure. Other things that I would do would be level audio, not necessarily in the sense that
normalizing.
Right, normalizing or normalizing it to minus 18 or whatever. That can be part of it also. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking more of if there are vocal takes that are not as consistent in volume, I try to fix that before I start really mixing. Mm-hmm. It's more of a consistent level, if that's what's called for. Again, just makes those things easier. Creative decisions become a little bit easier when you don't have to fix a line that's like, oh, this is 6 or 7 dB lower than the following line, whatever happens to be. Mm-hmm. So those things. And also, last thing I want to say on that is like organizing your session. That's a big one.
Especially with like the arrangement order in your arrangement window and your color coding of your tracks. We've done entire episodes on that too. So
yeah, but that's a big one. Indeed. That's a big one for me as well, because you just have more manageability of your session and being consistent.
It's a big deal.
So if you keep your drums on top, don't have them at the bottom on the next session. It sounds like really dumb when you bring it up like that, but just the consistency of that is just
it's a big deal.
Helping. It is. What's next, Jody?
It's a good idea to learn the key commands and or keyboard shortcuts that create certain functionality in your DAW. That's the fastest way to get fast at whatever it is you need to do. I know that I have one particular key command in Logic that makes me lightning quick when it comes to tracking audio. And there was a point in time where Logic and the Logic team at Apple removed it. Luckily, I had a connection to say, hey, did you mean to do that? And they replaced it within about 24 hours, which was very nice of them, because it was mind-numbing to think, okay, now that's going to take me 3 steps instead of 1.
Yeah. Learning shortcuts is a great way, obviously, to not only learn your DAW, but to really speed up your workflow. Mm-hmm. When I started out with Logic, I was very gung-ho, and I know I've told this story before. I wanted to map out everything that Logic could do, and I was going to try to come up and assign everything to... it was a huge pain in the ass. I was going to come up with my own thing, and I was going to do whatever I thought was a good idea at the time.
Right.
Turns out it's a huge waste of time, right? Don't try to learn everything. Learn the ones from the tasks that you performed regularly. Mm-hmm. Then if you have downtime, try to just add one more a week. You'll start learning these key commands and shortcuts as opposed to just mousing around in your session.
It saves you time.
It certainly does. Now, since I do a lot of editing these days in Pro Tools, mm-hmm. when you switch to a new DAW, there is no better time to realize how well you knew your previous DAW or another DAW. And learning shortcuts in a new situation is the best way to move forward. To me, what happens as I go back to Logic and Pro Tools back and forth, some of the key commands stick with me, and I have to kind of like reset. It's like, all right, you're not in Pro Tools anymore, dummy. This does a completely different thing.
Yeah, but doesn't Pro Tools do the same thing that Logic does? You can program your own key commands, and that way you can change them so that you have a consistent view across both of them?
Yes, but not entirely. You might be able to do that, but
I know in Logic you can.
Yeah, in Logic you can. The thing with me, though, is a little bit of a caveat to this. I wanted to be a little bit more masochistic in the way that I actually wanted to learn Pro Tools the way most people use it.
Okay.
So like using certain key commands, I wanted to just know that as opposed to just putting a Band-Aid over it and using like Logic stuff. I think Logic is a lot friendlier with the assignment of key commands.
Sure.
So
you can put anything you want in there as a key command, and you can remove old ones and make new ones and do whatever you want. That's the one drawback to Luna. There is no ability to do that. You literally have to use the key commands they have, and that's frustratingly annoying. Eventually, I'm sure they'll put in the ability to do your own key commands. And when they do that, I will port over my Logic ones ASAP.
I'm a little torn on that subject because I can definitely see it both ways. I really like the idea that when you sit down on somebody else's system, that the same key commands are going to apply.
Sure.
The argument to that would be like, well, in Logic, you can just export them and you can import them in a new session.
Yep.
And that's fine. There is something to be said for being able to work with the same key commands, any workflow on any system that runs the same DAW. Learning a few key commands and letting that list grow as the more your task you complete is a huge tip. Next up.
Don't stop learning.
Don't stop learning.
Never assume that you know everything, because there's a lot of guys out there on social media that claim to know it all.
Yes. I have a theory on that. I think it's like people have an aversion to admitting that they don't know something. So people have like a really strong opinions about what it is. And that goes back to like the gear. It's like, oh, unless you're using the UA LA2A, your mixes are going to be shit. You know? Right. But it's just absurd. However, you always want to learn, right? And I think you said off the top that, you know, you still learn to this day, right? Whatever that is, a certain technique or something that you go, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't been doing that all these years.
Right.
Or if it's even like a new key command. It's like, oh my God, Logic can do that? I'm using Logic since 4.7, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't know it couldn't do that. So you're always going to keep learning. And it's a good idea to listen to experts. And that's something that, unfortunately, I think in society seems like a bad idea at this point. People that have a certain experience and are really good at what they do, they have some wisdom to share with you.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that you always have to adopt it. You got to be open-minded and make use of the experience that they have had and draw your own conclusions from it.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons for that is because they may have found a certain way of doing things that works and works extremely well. And maybe you're trying to do something very similar and it's not working so well because you're not using that same workflow. Yeah.
Some things do stand the test of time, right? Like, let's say, for example, don't put reverb on your kick drum. As a rule, it's like, well, why is that? Well, it just smears everything there, and it's not going to make your kick solid. Does that mean that you can never do that? No, of course not. If your situation calls for that, things like that, it's a good idea to not have reverb on your kick drum.
Right.
We always want to keep learning. We can find inspiration wherever we are in whatever situation it might be. That's something that we should all hunger for. And I think when we have the mindset of that, we know everything, we're less receptive to new ideas.
Oh, and that's where the bonus tip, number 6, because we were talking about 5 workflows here. There's bonus tip. What's the bonus tip?
Well, I had to put this one in, and it's going to sound like I'm completely contradicting myself. I'll explain. That's to stop learning. What are you talking about, Chris? You always said you should learn. Well, it's also important to put whatever you learn into practice. We can get so caught up in learning and going through classes or listening to podcasts such as this one, which you should always do, by the way, like going down the YouTube rabbit hole of learning techniques and always being better and trying to learn every technique known to man, that you're essentially not working on music.
Yep.
You need to put these into practice and see why it's working, or if something is not working for you. Somebody said, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Dave Pensato. But he said something to the effect that somebody that works on a mix for a whole year compared to somebody who spits out a mix every week and they start at the same level, if you will. The guy who does more mixes in a year, he's going to be a better mixer at the end of the year because he's put in the time and done more, as opposed to trying to be so like perfect with everything that we do. It's time to stop learning and getting your hands dirty, as it were. That's the last one I got. I mean, I could go on and talk about it's really important to like develop your ears and learning how to listen and all that kind of stuff, but then we'll be here all day.
We don't want that. So we should move on to our Friday finds. Chris, what have you got this week?
Well, this is an old one, kind of. I think there's new versions coming. Speaking of workflow and all this kind of thing, I wanted to pick Steven Slate drums.
Okay.
SSD 5.5. That's the current version as of recording this. And the version I have, it's a fast, quick, dirty way of getting really great drum sounds. Sometimes when I do stuff, if it's for a library or whatever, quick turnaround, I don't want to sit there and tweak the tuning of every snare drum or the bleed to every mic in TuneTrack's Superior Drummer. I love that piece of software, but sometimes you just want it like quick, and this is the one for me that I tend to go to, and that's SSD 5.5 by Steven Slate Drums. So there's something to be said for speed. What about you, Jody?
I'm going with Universal Audio's Ampex ATR 102 tape plugin. As of the taping of this episode, they did an update of that. They've updated the interface and they've added some new shiny buttons and features to the Ampex ATR 102 tape plugin, which for those of you out in mastering land or even wanting to have a good sounding master mix land, the ATR 102 is one of those plugins that I would say get your hands on. And now they've added the functionality of auto gain. Thus, if you're cranking something on the input and wanting to get the saturation of the tape sound and then wanting it to come down and level on the output so it's not blowing out your speakers, the auto gain function is a handy new feature. So there it is. The Ampex
all right, so that's the one that's going to make
UA.
all the other tape emulations obsolete. So this is the one.
Right. While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. You'll need to be on our email list in order to be eligible for future giveaways, and we'll make sure you don't miss any episodes of this incredible podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the word workflow, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic or suggestion for Chris and I to talk about in a future episode, contact us at the contact page and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. With that, I'll say see you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody.